I want to welcome everybody to this demonstration. Why were certain family members protected in the JonBenet Ramsey case? Medical evidence has a suspect. Salute to the chat. Salute to my moderator. Salute to the gang. I've been going back and forwards with myself when it comes to the case. 1 minute, I believe that the mom and dad didn't play a part in it. The next minute, I believe that the mom and dad did play a part in it. 1 minute, I believe that the brother, Bert, didn't play a part in it. Next minute, I believe that he did. Now, where I'm at today, I do believe that Burke is responsible. Now, the medical evidence, we're going to go to the medical evidence that's going to help us at least raise an eyebrow on strong possibility that Burke was involved. And I know there are many of you that feel like he was just the innocent 9-year-old little boy. He couldn't have. Well, we've seen cases where 9-year-old little boys have done this type of crime. All right. Salute to my moderators. I hope everybody have a wonderful and blessed new year. I hope you all brought in the new year doing something that you love to do. Salute to Sagittarius. I see you, Sagittarius. Salute Turner1947. Salute David. David says simple answer, Freemasonry. But let's just tap into some of this evidence, some of the medical evidence. All right. Let's tap into this.
December 26, 1996, Boulder, Colorado. A 911 call at 5:52 a.m. reports a child kidnapping. By 1 p.m., the kidnapped child is found dead in her own basement. 6-year-old JonBenet Ramsey had been struck in the head with tremendous force, then strangled with a garrote made from her mother's paintbrush. A 3-page ransom note written on household paper demanded exactly $118,000, the amount of John Ramsey's recent Christmas bonus. The crime scene was contaminated. The investigation was bungled.
Now, this is what I feel. I feel like once the mom realized what the son Burke done, that's when she attempted to cover this up. Who would have known the exact amount? I believe the $118,000, I believe that was the amount that the dad John received as a Christmas bonus. Now, how would anybody else know that exact number? So I feel like Burke committed the crime. And then once Patsy found out, she tried to cover it up. Well, look, we can make it like it was a kidnapping. That's where I'm at with it. All right.
And for 29 years, this case has remained unsolved. Multiple theories have been proposed. An intruder theory, supported by unknown DNA found on JonBenet's clothing. A parent involvement theory, supported by the ransom note and behavioral evidence. And a third theory, one that many investigators privately believe is most consistent with the evidence, that 9-year-old Burke Ramsey was involved in what may have started as an accident, and that his parents, John and Patsy, staged an elaborate kidnapping scenario to protect their surviving son. This video examines that theory, not as accusation, but as analysis of medical evidence, forensic findings, and investigative conclusions that point in this direction. Before we begin, it's critical to state clearly, Burke Ramsey has never been charged with any crime related to his sister's death. he is legally innocent. In 2008, the Ramsey family was formally exonerated by then District Attorney Mary Lacey based on DNA evidence, though this exoneration was later questioned and partially walked back by her successor. What we're presenting here is an investigative theory based on publicly available evidence, grand jury documents that were sealed for 14 years, and the conclusions reached by multi-disciplinary. This is examination that suggests and many experts believe explains what happened that night. With that context established, let's examine the medical evidence that points toward Burke's involvement and the cover-up that followed. The medical evidence begins with the autopsy performed by Dr. John Meyer, Boulder County's chief medical examiner, on December 27, 1996. Dr. Meyer's findings documented two catastrophic injuries to JonBenet's body. First, a massive skull fracture, an 8.5-inch linear fracture running from the top right side of her skull toward the back. The force required to create this injury was substantial. This wasn't a simple fall or bump. This was a blow delivered with significant force using a hard object. The fracture caused bleeding between the skull and the brain, swelling, and what would have been immediate unconsciousness. Medical experts who reviewed the autopsy findings have stated that this head injury alone, if left untreated, JonBenet would have had perhaps 1 to 2 hours of survival time, maybe less, before brain swelling caused death. She would have been unconscious from the moment of impact. The second major injury was strangulation via a garrote. A cord was wrapped around JonBenet's neck and tightened using a stick as a handle, creating a tourniquet effect. This wasn't manual strangulation where someone uses their hands. This was a device constructed specifically for this purpose, using Patsy Ramsey's paintbrush as the handle and cord from somewhere in the house. The strangulation caused petechial hemorrhages, small blood vessels bursting in the eyes and face, evidence that she was alive when the garrote was applied. Her heart was still beating, blood was still circulating, but she was unconscious from the head injury. Here's where the medical evidence becomes crucial in understanding what may have happened. Dr. Meyer estimated, based on the progression of swelling and hemorrhaging, that there was approximately 45 minutes to 2 hours between the head injury and the strangulation. The head blow came first. The garrote came later. This timeline is critical because it suggests two separate events, possibly by two different people, possibly with two different intents. The head injury could have been an accident, an argument between siblings that escalated, a 9-year-old boy who struck his sister in anger or frustration, not understanding the force he was using or the consequences. Medical experts have noted that children, especially boys around age 9 or 10, don't always comprehend their own strength. They're at an age where they're physically capable of causing serious harm, but cognitively still children who don't fully understand cause and effect.
And I can say that because when my son was around that age, and I'm glad that my son knew his strength, and now I'm dealing with my grandson. My grandson is 12. Now, when his sister is 11, and when his sister is, bothering him, and I can see the anger in him, and he'll just be like, "Ugh!" But I could see, and I could know for a fact, if my grandson was to jump on his sister, he could really cause bodily harm. So, but let me come to my chat and see what my chat talking about. Cold-blooded, red rum sacrifice. Threw that bat out the window. The newborn heard it. It was a metal belt. She heard that metal bat hit the concrete noise in the middle of the night. I see Sagittarius. Who else? I see y'all. But that's a good point, Sharon. Sharon, I hope I pronounced your name right. And David. Now, was it a sacrifice? How many of y'all believe it was a sacrifice? Drop a 1 if you think it was a sacrifice.
Especially in moments of anger. If Burke struck JonBenet with something hard, a flashlight perhaps, barely understand that he'd caused a fatal injury. she would have collapsed immediately. Two might simply appear to knock out her sleep. This injury, they realize it's serious, possibly fatal, and they face an impossible decision. Call 911, take her to a hospital, and risk their son being charged with his sister's death? Even if it was an accident, even if Burke didn't mean to hurt her, the legal system might not see it that way. He could be taken away, placed in juvenile detention, labeled a killer for the rest of his life, or do they try to cover it up? Create a scenario that explains JonBenet's death without implicating Burke. Many people find this scenario impossible to believe. What parent would cover up their child's death to protect another child? But consider the context. John and Patsy Ramsey were wealthy, successful, image-conscious people. John was a self-made millionaire, CEO of a computer company. Patsy was a former beauty queen, the mother who'd pushed JonBenet into the pageant circuit. They'd built a life based on success, perfection, appearance. The idea that their son could be responsible for their daughter's death, that this horror occurred in their own home under their watch, would destroy everything they'd built. The shame, the legal consequences, the loss of both children, one dead and one in the juvenile system. The scenario being presented by many investigators is that they made a terrible decision. They chose to protect Burke by staging a crime scene that would point away from him and toward an unknown intruder.
And that's where I'm at. How do y'all feel? Sadie says, I think it was a ritual. Because here's the thing, now we got to think in the mind of a parent. They done already lost one child. Their daughter is gone. Now, do they risk losing the second child? Now, as a parent, what would I have done? What would I have done? To be honest with you, I might have done the same thing that we believe they done with Burke. I might have covered for my son. I'm going to be honest with y'all. How many of y'all would have covered for your son? He's 9 years old. And we know children at 9, they're innocent, but then they could be mischievous. They can be devious. They could be some hard-headed, badass kids, even at 9 years old. But we still know that at 9, they still have a good side to them. So as a parent, I'm sure many of you would have covered for them. But 30 years later, and no one has been arrested, it's a cover-up. I cover enough of these cases to know when it's a cover-up. Now, the JonBenet Ramsey case has been a cover-up. But the $1 million question is, who? Who is they covering for? It's 4 individuals. Are they covering for John, the dad? Are they covering for Patsy, the mom? Are they covering for Burke, the brother? Or are they covering for this Nick Wolf guy? One way or another, listen. Regardless of who you may feel committed this act, somebody committed the act. She didn't do this to herself. So we know that there's at least one person that's responsible. Why are certain family members being protected? It's no way in the world that a 6-year-old little girl was hit over the head, strangled, and inappropriately touched, and no one has been arrested. The evidence is there. The medical report, the autopsy, the crime scene, the fact that somebody, and I'm going to say the somebody is the mom and dad, somebody want us to believe that an intruder made it through that skinny ass window. I ain't buying that. Somebody wants us to believe that just some random Joe Blow or some random Jane Doe was able to get into their home and moved from upstairs, downstairs, the basement, and didn't go detect it. The dad didn't put two and two together. So then it goes from reported kidnapping. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. It went from a reported kidnapping to a deceased little girl. How? How? I mean, come on, y'all. It don't take a rocket scientist to figure this out. You don't need a degree in law. It's just common sense.
The garrote is the key piece of evidence in the staging theory. Medical examiners confirmed that JonBenet was alive but unconscious when it was applied. Her heart was still beating. If the parents found her unconscious from the head injury, possibly believing she was already dead or dying, and decided to stage a sexual assault and kidnapping gone wrong, they might have constructed the garrote as part of that staging. The garrote, made from Patsy's paintbrush, was sophisticated in its construction. It wasn't something a child would create. It required knowledge of knots, leverage, and intent. Some experts have suggested it was too elaborate for a 9-year-old, but consistent with staging by adults who wanted to make the crime look like the work of a sadistic intruder. The tragic irony, according to this theory, is that JonBenet might have survived the head injury with immediate medical attention. But by the time the garrote was applied, by the time the staging was complete, she was beyond saving. Whether she was already clinically dead from the head injury or whether the garrote caused her biological death is unclear. But the sequence suggests that adults, not a child, created the garrote as part of a cover-up scenario. Let's examine the other evidence that investigators believe points toward Burke's involvement. First, the pineapple. As we've covered in a previous video, JonBenet had pineapple in her stomach, partially digested, indicating she ate it 1 to 2 hours before death. A bowl of pineapple was found on the kitchen table. Burke's fingerprints were on the bowl. Patsy's fingerprints were on the bowl. JonBenet's fingerprints were not on the bowl, suggesting someone fed her or she ate from the bowl without touching it. The parents claimed JonBenet never woke up after being put to bed, that she never ate anything. But the pineapple proves otherwise. The most logical explanation is that Burke and JonBenet were both awake late that night. They were in the kitchen. Burke was eating pineapple. JonBenet joined him or he gave her some. Something happened between them during or after this snack. An argument, a physical altercation, the kind of sibling conflict that occurs in homes every day but that, in this case, ended tragically. Second, the 911 call. As we've covered in another video, enhanced audio analysis of Patsy's 911 call captured voices after she believed she'd hung up. 3 distinct voices were identified by audio experts. Patsy's voice sounding calmer than during the call, saying something like, "Help me, Jesus." John's voice sounding angry, saying, "We're not speaking to you." And a young male voice, identified as Burke, saying, "What did you find?" The Ramsey family maintained for years that Burke was asleep during the 911 call and throughout the morning chaos. But the audio suggests he was awake and downstairs.
We're going to stop right there. Is there anyone, even after hearing this, is there anyone that still believes that Burke is innocent? Drop a 3. Drop a 3 if you still believe Burke is innocent. I'm dropping a 4. Drop a 4 if you feel like Burke is responsible. What's up with the pineapples? I mean, and she had those pineapples an hour to 2 hours before her death. Both Burke, the brother, and Patsy, the mother, fingerprints was found on the bowl. Sajid says he's responsible. David said died in horror. Sharon says Patsy always seemed suspicious to me. David says this is what they want you to believe. Well, let me say this, David. They done a very good job of convincing me. Now, I'm going to say allegedly. I will say allegedly, but from what I just heard, they convinced me. It's it's no way in the world. It's no way in the world that just some random person committed this. It's no way. Caller says Burke did it. It's no way in the world a random person done this.
If he was awake, if he was part of the morning events, why did the parents lie about it? What were they hiding about Burke's involvement? The most logical explanation, according to investigators, is that Burke was involved in what happened to JonBenet, and the parents were constructing a narrative that kept him out of the story entirely. Third, Burke's behavior in the days and weeks following his sister's death. Multiple people who interacted with Burke noted that his demeanor seemed unusual for a child who'd just lost his sister. He wasn't crying. He wasn't visibly upset. In interviews with child psychologists and social workers conducted shortly after the murder, Burke's affect was described as flat, detached. When asked to draw a picture of his family, he drew everyone including JonBenet, but didn't draw himself crying or show any indication of grief. Child psychologists noted this was unusual, but not necessarily indicative of guilt. Children process trauma differently than adults. Some become withdrawn or show little emotion as a coping mechanism. However, in a 2016 interview with Dr. Phil McGraw, adult Burke's behavior was again noted as unusual. He smiled and even laughed when discussing his sister's murder.
Stop right there. Now, what kind of disorder, what kind of any medical diagnosis or whatever y'all want to call it, y'all know I mess up with the wordplay, but you can't convince me, because if your sister, whether you're a little boy, whether you're a teenager, or whether you are an adult, and if your little sister was hit over the head, strangled, and appropriately touched, and she's deceased, it's no way in the world that you're going to be laughing. It's no way in the world you're going to be smiling. Ain't a damn thing funny about that. It wasn't done by a random person. Burke was a weirdo as a kid and especially as an adult, which gives me more reasons to believe he's responsible. It wasn't done by any random person. Burke's responsible. I mean, after 29 years, with everything that we know, and more things are starting to come out.
Responses that many viewers found disturbing. Dr. Phil defended Burke, saying some people smile when nervous. But body language experts and psychologists who reviewed the interview noted the smiling seemed incongruous with the subject matter. Again, this isn't proof of guilt, but it's part of a pattern of behavior that investigators found concerning. Fourth, the grand jury's decision. In 1999, after reviewing evidence for 13 months, a Boulder County grand jury voted to indict both John and Patsy Ramsey in death and for accessory to a crime, meaning helping someone else committed a crime. The indictment language, which was sealed until 2013, stated that John and Patsy did unlawfully, knowingly, recklessly, and feloniously permit a child to be unreasonably placed in a situation which posed a threat of injury to the child's life or health, which resulted in the death of JonBenet Ramsey. It also stated they did render assistance to a person with intent to hinder, delay, and prevent the discovery, detention, apprehension, prosecution, conviction, and punishment of such person for the commission of a crime. This language is crucial. The grand jury didn't accuse the parents of killing JonBenet directly. They accused them of permitting a situation that led to her death and then helping someone avoid prosecution. Many legal experts interpret believing Burke was involved in JonBenet's death and that the parents covered it up. However, then District Attorney Alex Hunter refused to sign the indictment, stating there wasn't enough evidence to prove the case beyond reasonable doubt in court. The public didn't learn about the indictment until 14 years later when a judge ordered the documents unsealed.
Stop right there. Stop right there before I go any further. Do y'all still, after hearing this, is it anyone that still believes a random Joe Blow or a random Jane Doe committed this? Is there still anyone that believes that Burke didn't do it? Is there anyone that still believes that Patsy didn't help with this cover-up? I cover enough of these cases to know it's a cover-up. Now, the $1 million question, and I'll probably get to this later on this evening at 10 p.m. So make sure y'all pull back up at 10 p.m. Eastern time, because I'm going to go down the rabbit hole and talk about the dad, John. But for right now, my attention is on Burke and Patsy. Patsy covered it up. Burke committed it, and Patsy, being the mom, she covered it up. She didn't want to lose both of her children. She didn't want to lose two of her children. It was a dark sacrifice for adrenochrome. I think they wanted us to believe it was B or P, but in reality was JR. We're going to find that out. But that family ain't right. I ain't buying it, everybody. The family is not right.
Fifth, the ransom note. We've covered this extensively in another video, but it's worth noting here that the ransom note appears to be staging. It's too long, too theatrical, too filled with movie references and personal details about the family. Handwriting experts couldn't eliminate Patsy as the author. 24 out of 26 letters matched her handwriting characteristics. If Patsy wrote the note, she was participating in a cover-up. And what would she be covering up? The most logical scenario is that she was creating a narrative that explained JonBenet's death while protecting Burke from suspicion. Now, let's address the most difficult aspect of this theory. If Burke accidentally or even intentionally caused his sister's head, could a 9-year-old be responsible? In Colorado in 1996, children under age 10 could not be charged with crimes in the same way adults or older juveniles could be. Burke was 9 years old at the time of JonBenet's death. He turned 10 just 12 days later. Even if investigators had definitive proof that Burke caused JonBenet's death, prosecution would have been complicated by his age. He likely would have been handled through the juvenile system, potentially placed in a facility for evaluation and treatment, but he wouldn't have faced the same consequences an adult would face. This legal reality is important context. Some people argue that if Burke was responsible, the parents could have simply reported it as an accident, and Burke would have received minimal consequences due to his age. But parents facing that situation in real time, in the middle of the night, with one child dead or dying and another potentially facing juvenile detention and a lifetime label as his sister's killer, might not think rationally. They might panic. They might make terrible decisions based on fear and desperation. It's also important to note that Burke, as an adult, has consistently maintained his innocence. He's denied any involvement in his sister's death. In 2016, he gave his first major interview in 20 years, speaking with Dr. Phil McGraw. He stated clearly that he didn't kill his sister, that he loved her, and that he was devastated by her death. He sued CBS for defamation after the network aired a documentary that presented the theory of his involvement, and the case was settled confidentially. Burke has legal rights to his reputation and has used those rights to defend himself against accusations. This video is not making accusations. We're examining a theory that investigators and experts have developed based on evidence. The difference is crucial. We're not stating Burke is guilty. We're presenting the evidence and analysis that has led some investigators to believe this scenario is consistent with the facts. So what's the bottom line? What does the medical evidence actually tell us? It tells us that JonBenet suffered a massive head injury that came first, followed 45 minutes to 2 hours later by strangulation with a garrote. This sequence suggests two separate events, possibly with different intents. The head injury could have been accidental, the result of a childhood fight that went horribly wrong. The garrote appears to be staging, constructed by adults to create the appearance of a sexual assault and murder by an intruder. The pineapple evidence proves Burke and JonBenet were both awake late that night when the parents claimed they were asleep. The 911 call audio suggests Burke was awake and present during the morning when parents claimed he was sleeping. The grand jury believed the parents helped someone avoid prosecution for a crime and permitted a situation that led to JonBenet's death. The ransom note appears to be staging written by Patsy. All of these pieces, when assembled, create a picture that many investigators find compelling. Not proof beyond doubt, not definitive evidence that would secure a conviction in court, but a theory that explains the evidence better than other scenarios. This case has haunted America for 29 years, not because we don't have evidence, but because the evidence points in directions that are deeply uncomfortable. The possibility that a child was involved in his sister's death, even accidentally. The possibility that parents chose to protect one child at the cost of justice for another. The possibility that wealth, social status, and legal resources allowed a family to avoid accountability. These are truths we don't want to accept. But the medical evidence, the forensic analysis, the grand jury's conclusions, all point toward Burke's involvement and a parental cover-up. Whether that theory is correct, whether it could ever be proven in court, whether Burke will ever face questions about that night, remains uncertain. JonBenet Ramsey deserves justice. After 29 years, she deserves the truth.
And that's so true. And he couldn't have said it no better. You know, it's like in families all over the world, there are a lot of secrets and there are a lot of skeletons. And family members protect monsters that just happens to be their sister, their brother, their cousin, their uncle, their grandma, the dad. So this is the norm for any family. And it could be any race. It could be a black family, white family, Mexican, Puerto Rican, Italian, Hispanic. It doesn't matter. All families have secrets. And there are family members in everybody's family that have been protected. We know that this was a cover-up. We know that they're protecting somebody. Now, some of y'all might say, but Shank, but why would they protect somebody and put themselves in harm's way? Who knows? Who knows? You know, and it could be for the reason that they know that they didn't do it. So they know, well, shit, worst come to worst, we won't have to worry about facing prosecution as far as us being the ones that actually did the act. We'll probably, get charged with the cover up, but that's nothing compared to how much time they're going to be faced if they're charged with the red rum. But people do all kind of things when it comes to their family. All the cases that I cover, damn near, I'm going to say 9 out of 10 of the cases that I cover, a family member or two is covering for the monster. I have been watching a couple of videos, and the whites were not happy with how they were going about solving this case, and they fell out with the Ramseys. I'm sure a lot of people fell out with the Ramseys. Because it's just, like I said, y'all, for me, my 6-year-old daughter, I'm going to have her under the microscope. My 6-year-old son, I got them under a microscope. And nobody's going to have access to my house. It was reported that some of the friends of the Ramseys had keys to the house. Maybe one friend of mine might have the key, if that. So I'm just not buying this. I'm not. And I'm going to say allegedly, but I'm not buying this. But like I said, this demonstration was about Burke and Patsy. My demonstration for later on this evening at 10 p.m. will be about John. There was some type of discrepancy as to whether the older brother was in town because somebody said they saw him in town. Let's see. We already went over that. I think we already had that one. Let's grab a little of this, y'all. Not a lot, just a little.
The murder of 6-year-old John, with many speculating that her father, mother, brother, or all three were involved in her killing. Tonight, her brother Burke speaks after 20 years of silence about that painful saga, and new evidence is brought to light. Juju Chang.
I remember the casket, eyes were closed. I think one of her eyes was a little bit like true, so that was weird.
How did you feel seeing her?
A lot of sadness. I don't think I really fully grasped. Just like after this, I won't see her again.
Burke Ramsey, now 29, breaking a 20-year silence, coming out of the shadows to speak publicly for the first time about his sister JonBenet's murder in an interview with Dr. Phil.
The next thing I remember, and my dad came and told me JonBenet is in heaven now, and he started crying. Then I started crying.
He was just 9 when his little sister was found viciously strangled in the basement of their own home. The child beauty queen, eternally 6 years old, whose gruesome, unsolved murder became America's fixation. 2 competing theories lingered for years. Did an intruder break in and kill? Or were the Ramseys themselves somehow responsible? Burke, who was reportedly paid for the interview, is the only family member in the house the night of the murder who's never come forward with his side of the story.
Did you hit your sister over the head with a baseball bat or a flashlight?
Absolutely not.
Burke says he stayed in bed for hours as dozens of investigators and loved ones swarmed the house.
Critics would say you weren't curious because you already knew. He didn't have to get up and check because he knew exactly what had happened.
I mean, I didn't know if there's some bad guy downstairs my dad was chasing off with a gun.
Everyone looks at the interview of Burke and thinks, why is this young man smiling?
I don't see a smile as much as I see an uncomfortable facial expression. But I don't see that as smile, happy smile. I see that as uncomfortable guy.
ABC's chief legal analyst Dan Abrams spent years in the saga.
Burke Ramsey has been one of the most sought interviewed by a news and tabloid organization out there because back at the time, people were saying, oh, maybe Burke did it, or what does Burke know?
At the time, the incessant media attention smothered the family under a cloud of suspicion. Then 9-year-old Burke was not immune. Years later, John Ramsey, John JonBenet and Burke's father told me that they were simply trying to protect their 9-year-old from the media onslaught.
There was one day when he and Patsy managed to escape the paparazzi, and they made it to a grocery store, and there was a headline that Burke
brother did it.
And he burst into tears.
Yeah,
well, what was his reaction?
Well, Burke's a very quiet, private person. We tried very hard to keep Burke's life normal, and that just was like a huge interruption to that.
The mystery began the morning after Christmas 20 years ago with a horrifying ransom note left in the Ramsey home, demanding $118,000 in exchange for the safe return of their little girl.
What's going on there, ma'am? We were kidnapped. Hurry, can you explain to me what's going on? There's a note left in our daughter's door.
But soon, John Ramsey, JonBenet's father, found her lifeless body in the basement, a moment he told me about in 2012.
When I found her, it was a rush of relief. And then, of course, within moments, I realized that she probably was dead. But she was back in my arms.
Now, y'all let me know. Could it have been immediately after finding the ransom note, they called 911? Well, I see, for me, and everybody thinks different, right? He was smiling at her funeral. Everybody thinks different. But for me, and y'all correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, you find the ransom note, I believe, on the steps. Why not look in the house just to see? Like I said, everybody does things different. But I can't see myself finding a ransom note. My daughter has been kidnapped, and I don't search the house. I don't look outside. I don't call, because who knows? That's a weird statement for a father to make. This whole thing, when we backtrack things, we just see it from a whole new, another different angle. And after all these years, see, now we're backtracking. And it just don't make sense. It don't.
It's never been easier to start a podcast than with Riverside. Here's how it works. First, go to riverside.fm.
The family home, hours after the discovery, captured in these crime scene videos, seen for the first time investigating Discovery docuseries airing. JonBenet had been strangled with a garrote, her skull fractured, and there were signs of sexual abuse. At first, investigators found no apparent signs of a break-in, and the Ramsey family came under the investigative microscope. Burke, too, placed under the harsh lights of the interrogation room.
When was the last time you saw JonBenet alive?
As seen in these newly discovered tapes of police interviews, included in an A&E documentary, the theory was that Burke killed her accidentally, and the family was covering up the crime. Inside the Ramsey home, a flashlight, heavy enough to be a murder weapon. The strangulation device made from the broken handle of Patsy's paintbrush. The bizarre ransom note was found to have been written on Patsy's notepad.
The ransom note is the single most important piece of evidence that led the authorities to think it had to be someone in the house.
I.e. John and Patsy Ramsey.
Because who else would have the time, they would say, to write that intricate note and practice it beforehand, other than someone trying to cover up a crime?
That's facts. So when was the ransom note written? Did the individual or individuals already write this ransom note before they got there? And if there were just a random Joe Blow or a random Jane Doe, how would they knew all of that? Let's say you got somebody just scoping houses on the neighbor in the block. Okay, we're gonna hit this right there. But how would they have this information? How would they know certain details? How would they know the characteristic of John and that ransom note? How did the individual or individuals know the certain characteristics of John? A 3-page ransom note? Nah. If it was just some random thing, that ransom note probably would have been no more than 4 sentences, 5 sentences at the most. We got your daughter. They would have listed how much money they was expecting, and then they would have let them know where to drop the money off at. And then I'm sure they would have put, don't contact police. But 4 sentences. But you don't get a 3-page ransom note. That's crazy work. It's crazy work. They said the tariff was too intricate for a 9-year-old to do. Burke was a Boy Scout, isn't not one of the main things taught. Facts. 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 They went beyond the extra mile. They went damn near 6 or 7 miles to orchestrate this. I'm talking about the cover-up. Too much. I ain't buying it.
The police play hardball, bluffing about the evidence they have.
We have trace evidence that appears to link you to the death of JonBenet. What would you tell me?
But Patsy never wavered, always adamant about their innocence.
Go back to the damn drawing board. I didn't do it. John Ramsey didn't do it, and we didn't have a clue of anybody who did do it.
Outside the Ramseys'
Stop
home,
right there. She never said Burke didn't do it. Did anybody catch that? She never said that Burke didn't do it. She said I didn't do it and John didn't do it. But she never said Burke didn't do it.
home, a constant crush of cameras.
Looking back on it, it looks like madness. But at the time, we were so crushed by the loss of our child that it didn't matter.
John and Patsy Ramsey were never charged with the crime, but were nonetheless skewered in the court of public opinion.
This is the first time that you've sat for an extended interview.
They eventually tried to set the record straight with Barbara Walters.
Mr. Ramsey, did you kill JonBenet?
No, I did not.
Mrs. Ramsey, did you kill your daughter?
No, I did not kill my daughter.
But if not the Ramseys, then who did it?
JonBenet was a pedophile's dream come true.
Lou Smith, the late detective who was brought in by the Boulder District Attorney's Office to conduct an independent investigation, believed a sexual predator killed JonBenet.
He brought her down to the farthest, deepest part of that basement and did very brutal things to her.
Smith uncovered evidence that had reportedly been overlooked by the Boulder police. A broken window where the killer could have entered. A footprint. Marks on JonBenet, indicative of a stun gun.
That was a little parade in Charlevoix.
When I spoke to John Ramsey in 2012, he had a lingering sense of regret. Child beauty pageants made him uncomfortable, and he told me if he had another chance, he wouldn't let JonBenet compete publicly.
Were you naive about letting her compete in pageants?
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
But your lesson was, what if we inadvertently exposed her to the killer?
Obviously, you don't want to keep him locked in the house, but it's just an awareness. Not everyone around you is a nice, good person.
A re-examination of the DNA evidence using new technology found an unidentified male's DNA on JonBenet's underpants, essentially clearing the Ramsey family.
This case, I think I have mentally much as I have thinking probably over the course of an intense investigation.
The new district attorney, Mary Lacey, took the extraordinary step of formally exonerating Ramseys. But vindication didn't come soon enough for the Ramseys. Patsy died from ovarian cancer in 2006. Today, John is remarried and lives a quiet life in Michigan.
I struggled a lot with forgiveness and what that meant. The first phase was, I can't forgive this creature. Let me get my hands on him. We will not.
Well, no one would blame you for being angry
And I was for a time, but you stay there, and because it's damaging to you as a person. It's a gift to yourself to let it go.
As Burke, he's now a software engineer and once back in the headlines.
It's sort of surprising that Burke gave up his anonymity.
And I think in retrospect, it was probably a mistake. I don't think he came across that well, even though he's totally innocent.
And yet 20 years later, JonBenet's case, still an unsolved murder. The Boulder police chief releasing this video statement.
We remain focused on this investigation and finding justice for JonBenet.
Now, are they going to do the right thing? Are they going to do what's right with this new evidence? Are they going to do right with retesting the DNA? I still believe what I believe. Let me grab a few comments, then we're going to get out of here. That's an overkill. This child was under 90 pounds. No, John, you were naive about keeping you and your family safe. Alarm systems, cameras, etc., etc. Carla, what? Burke put feces on her Christmas candy and he left feces in her bed on Christmas. The maid confirmed that. Let me see if I can grab the maid, y'all. David says the right thing. Let me see if I can grab the maid.
And who could blame her?
It's never been easier to start a podcast than with Riverside. First, go to riverside.fm and open an account. When you're ready to record, just hit record to capture high-quality audio and video, all from the comfort of, well, anywhere.
It was a gruesome murder, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. There was an 8.5-inch gash across her head. You have strangulation with a garrote made out of a paint stick. Now, this paint, for the last, about a month ago, I learned that the paint stick that was broken in half and they made paintbrush stick was in fact one of Patsy Ramsey's paint brushes. And she also, one of the things that's in this story is that there's odd touches. She's in this big storage room, but found with her is her very, very favorite possession in the world, according to one of her relatives, her pageant nightgown. It's, snuggled up with her.
I got nightmares in my head, I feel lost filled up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I feel.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. Now, this is essentially part 3 in the Ramsey housekeeper story. Now, she was trying to write a book about it, but she certainly got to the point really very, very quickly. And so when she shares her theory of what happened, this is what she writes. And we're going to deal with Linda Hoffman's 5 very disturbing observations. If you have subscribed to the channel, please do. If this is worthwhile, please hit the thanks button and let's get started. So she starts by saying, so let me tell you how I believe JonBenet was murdered. Number 1, Patsy was exhausted. Now, this paints a totally different portrait from the sort of mostly evidentiary portrait we've seen. We get a sense of Patsy through the housekeeper as a person. We get a sense of Patsy through the housekeeper, of the dynamics linking Patsy to the rest of her family, and in a sense, how they would have experienced their mother, this lady, John's wife. And whatever the housekeeper's motive in writing this book, a lot of it does make sense. Remember, December was a jam-packed month for Patsy and John. Patsy had an early 40th birthday party celebration. John was also celebrating a bonanza business year at Access Graphics. Another aspect that's not often spoken about is John's birthday, which was the 7th of December. So there was quite a lot of celebrating taking place and parties in the December of 1996. And we get a real authentic sense of the run up to Christmas from Perfect Murder, Perfect Town. In 1996, I called and asked me to watch the again, having a surprise for Patsy. I hid out in until Patsy's friend. And then JonBenet a lot. She was taller and colored. I didn't know about her pageants until that night. I saw all her trophies. Then Patsy called me on December 1st, the night of the Access Graphics Christmas party. She wanted me to sit with JonBenet and Burke. Patsy told me to make sure JonBenet kept her hair in rollers overnight. She had a pageant the next day. Now tell me, what wants to sleep in rollers? While we were watching TV in her parents' room, John put one of her crowns on my head. Now, this is also quite an interesting analogy to the idea, would JonBenet, if she had rollers in her hair overnight, I mean, there was a purpose to that, would she have pigtails and a ribbon in her hair if her mother really cared about, the beauty pageant side of things? Then there's also another reference from Perfect Murder, Perfect Town. One final note, this is from Patsy. Thank you to all my friends and my dear husband for surprising me with the biggest, most outrageous 40th birthday party bash I've ever had, ! We'll be spending my actual birthday on the Disney Big Red Boat over the new year. And so you get a sense that there was a frenetic amount of activity, parties, preparations, outrageous birthday bashes, and so on, not just for Patsy, but likely for John as well. And so when the housekeeper claims that Patsy was tired by, the 23rd, 24th, 25th, she may have a point. She writes the following. If I was speaking to Patsy Ramsey right now, this is what I would say to her. You were spent and exhausted, weren't you? That's kind of the first thing she thinks about. She feels if she confronted Patsy right now, the first thing she would say is, you were really tired, weren't you? The holidays do that to people. Now, remember, Patsy also went to New York on a shopping spree, I believe, with the Steins.
I want more from this. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to definitely Google the feces statement, and when we come back this evening at 10 p.m., I'll make sure that I at least have, if not a video, at least the actual statement. Appreciate this, caller. So I'm going to end this right here, and we'll be back this evening, 10 p.m. Eastern time. All right. Salute everybody. I'll leave the chat running, and y'all can hang around for a food. Once again, I'll see everybody back this evening at 10 p.m. Eastern time.
And immediately after that, prepared JonBenet for her next pageant. So I think the pageants were another thing that were exhausting Patsy and perhaps JonBenet as well. You have all of this activity, and then when you're home, when you have a chance to rest, there's all of this prep, all of this work, all of this scrubbing and rehearsing and getting ready for these pageants. That must have sucked up a lot of energy. Number two, Patsy was even more exhausted on Christmas Day. Now, is it just me, or does Patsy look particularly tired in this last photo of Patsy with JonBenet? Now, one thing even Patsy didn't anticipate was the housekeeper not turning up the day after the Christmas party on the 23rd. She was supposed to. And I think this shows just to what extent Patsy did feel as tired as a snail crawling uphill, as tired as a ship without wind. That she felt like a book with every page turned. According to the housekeeper and how she was quoted in Perfect Murder, Perfect Town, Linda Hoffman said, I was supposed to come back the next day, that's to the Ramsey home, December 24th, that's after the Christmas party, and clean up. That was what she was supposed to do. I called Patsy and said I couldn't. I told her I had a fight with my sister and needed some money to pay the rent. And one does wonder whether that little bit of information I needed money to pay my rent, didn't figure into whoever wrote the ransom note.